You're listening to Radio TLA. Hello, good morning. Welcome to my show, Autism and Beyond. It's my first time. I'm really, really excited. So today I'm going to talk to you about Autism and Beyond, episode 1, the first episode that I created for the big show that will talk about everything. But first, I kind of want to welcome you to TLA Radio. I'm excited to introduce you the new podcast, Autism and Beyond, that's going to happen both in Hebrew and English. Every week it's going to alternate. And this week it's in English, and it's going to normally happen Thursdays at 2 p.m. But today we started it a little early. What are the topics we're going to talk about in Autism and Beyond? So the first topic is going to be the reasons of me creating this podcast. I'm excited to share it with you. And also, we're going to talk about the basics. What is autism? I will share with you my theory of autism, and also what causes autism and how to understand the specific cause to the specific individual who is diagnosed with autism. So let's dive in. I want to kind of touch all of the above. So let's start with the reasons of autism and beyond, why I started this. So I started this podcast. First of all, my name is Dana, in case you don't know, and I have a daughter called Ella Lautman. And I am her mother. She was diagnosed with autism when she was 2 years and a half. And she's my reason. She's my inspiration. But there are some extra reasons why I thought it would be good to share and talk about this subject. And it's probably also because how much I'm consumed by the life of autism, how much I love it, and just want to live and breathe autism as much as I can. So those are the two reasons that I kind of thought about. But I also have a lot of knowledge that I have to share. So I feel like it would not be fair if I didn't share this knowledge, if I didn't talk about this subject. People would miss out on important things. So I want to share with you a lot of knowledge that based on my personal experience I have acquired over the years. So I would really be happy to share this with you. And those are the reasons for Autism and Beyond. And we're going to continue doing this every week. And I'm really excited. So without further ado, we'll talk about what is autism. Okay, so I will kind of give you a brief explanation that is easy to find on Google, but it's the best way to kind of explain it. So autism or spectrum disorder, or autism spectrum disorder, ASD, refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. According to the Center of Disease Control, autism affects an estimated 1 in 54 children in the United States today. So, yes, it is a diagnosis that is kind of becoming more frequent, and most of what is felt in the diagnosis, based on my personal experience, is the inability to communicate, the inability to form full might be a communication skill, or there's a hardship. It is a little harder for us to communicate with individuals who have autism. So let's dive into the causes, because it's very interesting. Why would we think? Why would we even have something like that happen to us? We're supposed to be very social creatures. I'm not saying that all of us have to be super social, but we're supposed to be very, very socially bond in order to continue living in this world. We're supposed to make bonds. This is the nature of our being. And it was really interesting to me what causes autism. So we're going to touch that a little bit, but I'm going to say and I'm going to link some of the greatest links I've read. But I also want to touch my theory first. So before we touch what causes autism, we'll dive into my autism theory. So we have this huge spectrum of autism, and there is high functioning and low functioning. So pretty much when we see kids with autism, it could be some kids who don't even look like they have it. They can talk to you just fine. They can, interact with you. And it's a very mild case where it's very barely seen. It's just something that they're socially a little bit having a harder time. And there are kids on the spectrum that are very, noticeably, you can tell that, and not just kids, individuals as well, are affected by the diagnosis. So, if there's a kid who's having a hard time with attention and, ADD, he's on the far end of the spectrum, very, very capable of doing everything that he wants to do or he or she wants to do. They're very independent. They have ability to speak. They have ability to express their emotions. But they have a little harder time maybe socializing or having hard time focusing or listening or paying attention. So that's the far end of the spectrum. And then there is another far end of the spectrum of those who don't really absorb any stimuli. So you can talk to them, ask them for their name, ask them who they are and what they do, and it will take them much longer to respond, or they may not even respond at all. So within this big spectrum, in between, there's different, it ranges. There's the low functioning and the high functioning and the in between. And it's very interesting, we can't, that's why when we ask what causes autism, we can't fully understand autism because the spectrum is so wide and it's so big, and there's so many neurological issues that we don't know exactly what it is. And when we ask what the causes of it, we first have to dissect and narrow down the spectrum to categorize it, to kind of make it okay. There's a section of people who are more capable, they have the ability, and there are people who have less ability than others. And then we can ask what causes each deficit in communication. So that's something that it's important to understand. And I'm sure most of the listeners do understand it. So we do need to dive into the issues a little bit with autism. And one of the biggest issues is language. And if I divide the spectrum, I would divide it to verbals and nonverbals, or minimally verbals. I'll put them in the same section. And I would say, okay, 40% of the kids on the spectrum are nonverbal. So that means they can't talk to us. And one language, speech, is the most common tool for social human interactions. So when they can't talk, when someone can't talk and explain how he or she feels and has this cognition disability, like ability to express the thoughts and words and put it into speech, they automatically become part of the spectrum. I was very contemplating at first if my daughter was on the spectrum, and when, there was a big, major inability to speak, they told me most people who have that disability, along with sensory issues and things like that, that puts you in the spectrum. Language is really big. Although it doesn't necessarily have to say that you're on the spectrum of autism, because some people literally don't have the ability to use their voice. But the understanding and the meaning of language and the utilization of language, if you don't have the ability to do those things, that kind of puts you on the spectrum, and you become part of the nonverbal, low functioning part of the spectrum. So that's very interesting. And now we can kind of dive into what causes it. What causes the inability to speak? What causes the smaller issues of, maybe not smaller, actually. I don't mean to put anything to, say that something is a little smaller than the other. There are issues and they're all vary, but the higher functioning area is more able to do things. And so there is the high functioning and there's the low functioning. And so when we ask what the causes are of each type of, autism, we can definitely kind of divide them first and kind of check out the also variation depends on the amount of therapies and amount of treatment that one individual cares. It's important to understand the human brain when we talk about autism. And, we have the ability to shape the human brain, which is a really cool thing. So a lot of kids on the spectrum, they are very advanced due to the fact that they were very they received a lot of therapies. They were really exposed to a lot of social interactions, which is great. But let's dive into the causes. So the first cause is a genetic mutation. So most of the causes, and when you see kids with autism, it's right away the assumption is genes. And it's not necessarily the only reason, but it's in the majority, the most reasons. We have about 2,500 and more genetic mutations that we've found that link with the inability to speak, or the inability for the brain to act the way it should. So I just want to touch up again, language happens in the human brain, and when the brain is not functioning the way it's supposed to function, what happens is we pretty much lose the ability to interact, because human interactions require tons of brain work. If you've ever heard that we only use 10% of our brain, that's the biggest myth. We actually use tons of social interactions are making tons of firing in our brain. A lot of work in our brain happens when we socialize, and socialization is really good for us. It's really good for our well-being, for our longevity. It is key tool for our survival. So I just kind of want to point out that part of the genetic mutations could hurt that ability of the brain to fully function, and therefore the kid or the individual will be part of the spectrum. After that, we have brain damage. Brain damage is a big cause of autism, and it's hard to tell which brain damage, but if the brain is damaged in one way or another, it could cause problem interacting. Because again, human interaction takes tons of effort. Even though we love it, it feels effortless to us, but it takes a lot of effort for the brain, a lot of firing of neurons, a lot of synaptic connections to make the brain work and speak. I always believe that language is the passion of socializing. And when you really love to socialize, you learn as many language as you want. That's my theory. Some people just learn languages just because they love languages, but I think the biggest motivation to learn a language would be the will and the need to socialize with other people. So we have genetic mutation, brain damage, and then we have social trauma. Social trauma can 100% make us averse to socialization. We would not want to socialize if we go through a very traumatic social experience. And that's just something that automatically, if we don't want to socialize, would put us on the spectrum, because the spectrum is the having a hard time with socialization. If we put it in easier words, that's part of what the spectrum means. And social traumas can affect the will and the soul and the mind, and the need to go ahead and socialize. And unfortunately that happens. And hopefully it's something that could be corrected again with therapy. And that's actually, I kind of want to touch that subject. It's for people who are more in the far end of the spectrum. So if there's the low functioning, where the low functioning would probably be under genetic mutations and brain damage. Social trauma would be more in the high functioning, in my opinion. Again, everything is my opinion. But if it doesn't make sense to you and you want to debate about it, I welcome you to come and drop some knowledge. But for the world that I've experienced, I've seen a lot of kids on the spectrum, a lot of individuals on the spectrum. It's actually been my goal to befriend as many people that are on the spectrum. And I did notice that the spectrum ranges between people who actually been through certain experiences, and some people who have been through a strong social trauma would not want to socialize anymore, and therefore they're going to be part of this huge spectrum we have, and we call it autism. So the next cause is brain tumors, and that cause is really dear to me, because I really want to study it and learn about brain tumors as much as I can. But brain tumors in different areas of the brain can really affect the way the brain works. And when the brain, which is this amazing computer that controls everything, that controls our thoughts and emotions and ability to, speak and talk to others, when something happens to our brain in certain areas of it, it could really affect our ability to understand what is being told to us, or, to just understand who we are in space and time. So brain tumors can definitely affect the ability to communicate and socialize. So that's part of the causes, but one of the causes to autism. Another cause that's a really, really dear to my heart, because I've known someone who's suffered from this cause, is epilepsy. And actually, just so you know, about 50% of kids on spectrum actually go through seizures. So epilepsy is if you don't know, it's a neurological phenomena, or we call it a disease even, of brain seizures. They can occur so often, or they can occur once in a while. They can be very strong. They also have a spectrum of their own, and it's kind of interesting how epilepsy happen, and we'll talk about it. Actually, every cause that I brought today, I will go into depth and talk about each cause. And that's why I'm mentioning those causes that I have today. I'm not saying those are the only causes. There are going to be tons of causes that we can talk about, but those are the 7 causes that I'm mentioning as I go that I will focus on. The second cause is gut dysbiosis. Gut dysbiosis is also something very inconvenient. We do know that our gut is our second brain. So that also is a big cause. Whatever we eat, whatever we consume can create a really bad reaction. But again, those things are individuals. Each individual can go through one of those things I mentioned. And the goal is to know what it is that makes you, and what made your autism. So the next cause is hypoic ischemic encephalopathy, and it's the loss of it's called HIE. Really hard to pronounce, but it's called a loss of oxygen to the brain. And that's a huge thing. It normally happens during birth. It also causes other things, but we'll talk about autism here, and then we'll go into depth. Loss of oxygen to the brain can really affect the ability of the brain to function. It normally happens if we were drowning and there's not enough oxygen in the brain. Could happen to newborns who, that a lot of that could happen during birth even. And we'll go into depth about that as we go on with our show. So those are the 7 causes I kind of wanted to mention. I have to say there are a lot of causes. There's tons of causes for autism, and we'll talk about each cause and we'll dissect it and we'll get a lot of information. And it's going to be super, super fun and interesting. So what to do? So now that we have all these causes laid out and we know what the cause is, what do we do? What do we do with it? So I definitely, if someone is newly diagnosed and, you feel like or fear that they may have something caused it and you may know what it is that caused, then you first have to check it to the best of your ability. And testing to test and kind of like investigate each case individually could really, really help. So the first step would be a psychological evaluation. So you go to a psychologist and you get evaluated and you get the diagnosis for autism. It's going to help a lot. A lot of parents are scared to do it. I was scared myself to do it at first, even though I kind of knew at 16 months. It definitely did change my life. It helped. I got a lot of help. So if you guys have the fear, go and check with a professional and get the evaluation done. To parents of kids with autism who may fear that they have autism. And then there is genetic testings. Right after, you first go to the genes, see if there are any genetic mutations. So I can say that it's kind of crazy, but about 90% of the kids who are diagnosed with autism are not having syndromic autism. So there's 2 types of autism. There's environmental factors, which I kind of mentioned. The environmental factors would be brain damage, social trauma, brain tumor. Brain tumors could go into genetics, maybe epilepsy too, but brain damage, social trauma, gut dysbiosis, and HIE can go into the part of environmental factors. Because when you ask, if you look up in Google, what's the cause or what are the causes for autism, they're first telling you that most of them are unknown, which might be true, but some of them are known, and it's really a question of investigating each individual. And pretty much we want to really feel that we answer all the questions that we ask. So if we say genetics is not the case, which for a lot of us it's not, what's the second test that we should do? We do blood testing. We do a hearing test, just in case, to make sure the individual hears in the right way. And then we can do stool and urine tests, mostly for gut dysbiosis and things like that, allergies. We can test for that. DNA testing is, again, for genetic or for things like mitochondrial deficiency, which is also technically a genetic thing, but it is just one of the deficiencies in the brain, that the neurons are not strong enough, and that's one of the causes for autism. So you can check for that, for DNA testings, for EEG. EEG is a test with electrodes that go onto the brain, and it's very, very fascinating, and it's really nice. You can really read the brain to check for seizures. So that's a great test to do if you have the fear that your kid or your loved one has autism and may have or may not have epilepsy. And finally, the last test would be MRI. So pretty much MRI is a test where you take a look at the brain. So you get a picture of the brain, you look at it, and you really are able to see it and understand it better. So those are the tests you can do in order to understand what is the specific cause of your loved one, your child, whoever it is. Those are the tests you can do. I'm going to kind of touch on the next topics that I will talk about. They're going to be really, really fun to talk about because I really want to understand autism. I have to first say that my belief is that, and I have to also stand corrected because when I did this podcast in Hebrew, I was wrong. I really thought that if anyone had the ability to speak, they just would gladly do it. But that's not the case. Some kids, very surprising phenomena, are choosing to be nonverbal. I really thought that kids with autism are literally, they literally, legitimately, at least the nonverbal. When I talk about the nonverbal and the more low functioning, I feel like they legitimately can't. It's not that they don't want and they have the ability. They have a problem, and it was, at least in my personal journey, it was found to be true that really there wasn't something that, they chose this. They didn't choose to not want to speak. And I'll compare speech to vision and to hearing, because it's one of the three things that we have been gifted with. And when we've been gifted with vision and hearing and sight and speech, I don't think that someone would choose to not speak. But I actually came across some very interesting individuals that I would love to bring them to our show, to our podcast. And they, in fact, have the ability to communicate fully, but they choose not to use speech. They use to communicate with their iPads, which is really fascinating to me. I would definitely want to understand the reason why they choose to communicate with iPad versus speech. If they really, they can, but they just don't want to, or is it too hard for them? That's going to be something super interesting. But in my theory, and my idea is that kids with autism, and I feel like I have this voice for them, is like they legitimately can't. They went through something that it was so massive that it enabled them from having the ability to speak and communicate like we do. And for that part of the spectrum, I speak on behalf of them, that we really need to do everything we can to try to understand them, to try to connect to them. I don't think they choose not to be connected with or not to socialize. It's really something that they've been through that is enabling them to do so. And in order to understand it so much better, we're going to talk about really interesting things. And the next things that we're going to talk about is the human brain and its development from birth until death. So we really need to understand the human brain and how it works. If we know how the human brain works, we'll know everything that we need to know about autism. That's what I feel. But it's really hard to know how the brain works. So we'll try by starting to understand how. And then I also would love to talk about how we form memories. Because creating a language is a really strong muscle of memory. So after we speak about memories, we'll talk about how we acquire language. And then yeah, and that would be the next episode of Autism and Beyond. And in the future, we'll bring people who are specialists, like speech therapists and pathologists, and I'd bring a lot of people who are in the field to come and talk and host with me the show. A lot of guests will be here to give us more knowledge, and it's going to be really, really exciting. Yeah, up until now, we have covered everything. I'll just kind of go over what we did cover. We covered the reason of the podcast, because it's the first day. What is autism? What causes autism? And my autism theory. And then how to try and solve and realize what the problems and the causes are, how to check it. And later on, we're going to talk about how to really understand it, fully understand it. So I had a lot of fun talking. I really enjoyed this podcast. I think I can never talk enough about autism. And that's something that I already said, but I really, really enjoy it. I'm really passionate about this. And I'd love for you to join me and talk about it more. And yeah, this is everything for today. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for listening to Radio TLA. We love you and can't wait to do more for you. Bye.